So this isn't a project that you've started because somebody from overseas decided to help you out, or you just felt like you needed an extra project to do in your spare time. There's actually probably a lot of people aren't aware how much religious freedom is already being attacked in Australia.
I would say that's true, yeah. I mean, the reason this ever got off the ground was just on a needs basis. We just saw things happening and said to ourselves, something's got to be done here. We're in a situation where there were some lawyers and barristers who were giving very, very sacrificially of themselves and of their time, and I really mean doing it tough. People who could be earning a lot of money and were not, because there were these cases that arose, and they sort of said to themselves, we have to help these people.
Yeah.
And they got involved and started helping. And some of these guys I got to know while I was at the Australian Christian Lobby. And also Jim Wallace, who is the chairman of the Australian Christian Lobby, had this idea himself as well. And a group of us kind of started to form where we were saying, we've got to do something. And so the decision to create a new organisation with a legal defence fund that was set up to facilitate legal support and legal advice was started, and nobody gets rich off of this. I mean, the barristers and the lawyers that helped us sacrificially at the start are still doing so. They're not charging full fees. They're not, they're just getting by, and that's the way we operate. We do it very cheaply, but also with a considerable level of credibility and expertise. We go in these things to give the best representation and to make sure that we have the best chance of winning them.
Yeah. So there's a concerted, if not coordinated, attack on religious freedom and Christian values and freedoms of speech and religion and political expression in Australia that a lot of people are unaware of. There's so, for example, we've already talked about on this show, cases where state-based human rights commissions and anti-discrimination commissions are being weaponised, sometimes at the beck and call of a very small number of individuals, to prosecute minority agendas. Instead of using democracy and the political system, they're actually turning our legal system into a loaded weapon and pointing it squarely at Christians, especially those who are uncompromising in their communication. Can you tell me some more about how prevalent that is, that a lot of people might not know?
Oh, look, it's really quite prevalent. So I would call it a rising intolerance and a desire to use the law, which is quite a powerful weapon and an intimidating weapon, to shut people up or to stop people from living peacefully and in good faith, but according to beliefs that you might find repugnant for whatever reason.
So if someone finds themselves being attacked, and many people have, does the truth actually matter?
No, actually, is the simple answer. It doesn't, because, and I'll qualify what I mean by that. I mean, you take an example of the Tasmanian Anti-Discrimination Act, and that act makes it unlawful to offend somebody, or offend, humiliate, insult, etc., somebody on the basis of a protected attribute. And I think there's about 14 protected attributes captured by that section.
Race.
Things like race, things like marital status, things like gender identity, things like religion, all sorts of things. And it makes it unlawful to do that. Now, there's certain defences. It's a little bit like 18C, Section 18C of the Racial Discrimination Act, which contains the same language about race. And then there's certain defences, which says, if it's artistic purposes, then it's exempted. If it's fair comment, it's things like that. Academic publication or whatever, it's exempted. But there's no defence for truth. And this is one of the extraordinary things about these laws. We've always had a limitation on speech called defamation in our law, which says that you can't target somebody to destroy their reputation. But there's a defence for truth. If I tell the truth about you, and I say something that's horrendous, but it turns out to be true, well, that's fine. It's a defence. Okay. Whereas, under the Racial Discrimination Act, for example, you could say something that is true about a racial group that needs to be brought out into the open for discussion. Not to hate anybody, but actually perhaps to love them, to help them so that we can talk about it. And the same thing might be so in Tasmania, where you might say something and you have no idea that it could be offensive, and it might be true, and yet because somebody else takes offence, and it's a reasonable person in that class of persons, it's the test isn't that objective, and somebody takes offence and you never meant it, you were saying it for good reasons, it was true, you can still find yourself at the Anti-Discrimination Tribunal. It's terrible.
Do you find sometimes that prospective clients or defendants actually feel like if they ask for help, it's some kind of admission of guilt?
Yeah, look, this is a big problem. I mean, particularly because some of the laws we've identified are actually carry criminal penalties. So you consider the...
Can you go into any details?
Well, the exclusion zones around abortion clinics, for example. Breaching one of those exclusion zones can give you a criminal penalty. And, it's particularly in issues of criminal law, but in issues of law generally. People think, if I don't talk to the police, or if I ring up a lawyer, or if I try and get legal advice, or they think that that's some admission of guilt, or they think that they don't have to do it because the truth is on their side.
You know why that is?
Why?
It's because on the TV shows, the police always say to the criminal, why would you need a lawyer if you're not guilty?
And I would suggest that is often true. It's often true, but increasingly not true. And I would suggest that just because somebody believes they've done something completely innocent, or even that there's truth on their side, as we we're just discussing, that's just no guarantee. And the law is such now that you should get legal advice, and you should get it as soon as possible before you do anything.
I don't think it's a recent phenomenon that innocent people can be found guilty.
No, it's not a recent phenomenon, but I think our understanding of guilt maybe has changed. Maybe not so much at criminal law, but the idea, for example, that Bill Leak is guilty of something that's punishable, with compensation payments and all this kind of thing, because he put out a cartoon that brings into the light a genuine social problem. And just because it's a social problem that is experienced particularly by a certain racial group, all of a sudden he's guilty of something. Yeah. Well, he's not guilty of anything. He's guilty of telling the truth. He's guilty of showing us something that we need to deal with and we need to address. As I said, out of just a simple position of love for neighbour. You want to go and have people understand the issue and go and resolve it. So you're right. It's not a changing phenomenon at all. But it's strange now that you can be guilty for expressing a political opinion or trying to raise a discussion of even fact, or trying to say, look, this is why I believe that marriage is between a man and a woman. It's not because I'm a bigot. I actually have these reasons. It's not unreasonable. You might disagree with them, but here are the reasons. All of a sudden the law comes into play. So our definition of, what makes you culpable seems to be changing.
Yeah. So in America, you have everybody screaming Nazi and fascist at anybody who's conservative because they're wanting to advocate and explain their certain point of view. I think they've misunderstood what the definition of fascist is, and the reality is that it means somebody who's not going to tolerate a diversity of ideas, somebody who's going to force a state-controlled system of thinking or system of values and actually shut down debate, shut down disagreement and independent thinking. Fascists usually, in history, go after Christians and religious institutions first because they're the most likely to be thinking independently and the least likely to be buying into the government and mass narratives around what society should be or shouldn't be doing. So I see these kind of laws that are being weaponized for leftist minority agendas as actually being the worrying dictionary definition of fascism.
Look, there's a lot. There's a lot in what you say. There's a lot of points I could make. One that I will make is this: we need to understand what's going on here very often with these processes that we're talking about. What's often happening is that somebody's actually having a disagreement. That's what it is. It's a disagreement. And what they're then doing is getting the government involved in resolving their disagreement. They're saying this government body is going to come and punish one of us for our opinion. That is a very dangerous place to be.
I don't know why we don't all want a democracy which promotes disagreement. Not hate, but difference of ideas. Like, surely you have to be very insecure in your position to be unwilling to be challenged in your position. I'm very happy for people to present me with facts, data and evidence to persuade me I'm wrong. If I'm wrong, I really want to know. I'm confident in my positions, but it wouldn't be the first time or the second time I've changed when presented with compelling arguments.
But that's what makes some people unique, I think. These days, people are no longer willing to be proven wrong because we live in a time where people believe, postmodernism has really done this, where truth has become entirely subjective. It's only what I perceive and feel and think. That's truth. And now we're moving into what some commentators would call a neo-pagan ethic, which is the idea that actually what's in here, these ideas, they're no longer just true, but they're actually kind of special and sacred in some way. And you can see that in the way that once we had laws that made it unlawful to blaspheme against Christ, now you've got laws that make it unlawful to blaspheme against someone's identity. We've actually brought the identity to such a level of prominence and sacredness that there's law protecting it.
That's a profound observation.
And that's where we're now at. And so the idea that somebody who believes that would accept that they are wrong, that to them is hate. They believe that because you disagree with the way they're living, or you disagree with what they want, or you disagree with what they see is the legitimate fulfillment of who they are, they believe that you are coming from a hateful position. You must hate them. So there's a terrible misunderstanding actually of what motivates the two sides. And so this is the first problem. We're now no longer in an environment or a worldview where disagreement is tolerable. And that's, I say that as a generalisation, and there's going to be a whole lot of people out there saying that's not me, and that's probably true. But I believe that that's where we're moving, and I can see that in the way these battles are waged, where we can't even. I mean, we saw the Bible Society issue and the Cooper's Light beer issue, and there was the most calm and rational and sensible and nice disagreement you could possibly ever have had. But even that's not allowed, because you must hate if you disagree, right? And this is the fruits, unfortunately, of what, and frankly, the church was sitting back and letting a lot of this happen, postmodernism and the neo-pagan thing that's coming through, and we've just allowed this, and the fruits are going to be very worrying indeed.
So, if we're not talking about you, great. If you're happy to be challenged and debated, fantastic. If you're happy to be proven wrong and have a contest of ideas, fantastic. If your church has not allowed postmodernism and is fearlessly vocal and uncompromisingly standing on the truth of the Word of God, that's fantastic. But the reality is that far too many people are not willing to be challenged, are offended by contradiction alone.
Absolutely.
And for too long, the church has absolutely been missing from the public debate about what is true. And that's a fundamental theological reality of the role of the church in every time that it's been, is we have a prophetic voice to declare truth. Not future telling, but to declare truth to society is exactly what we're doing. And I will mention over and over again that I'm inspired by Andrew Bolt and agnostics mourning for the absence of the voice of the church in the public sphere, declaring truth and fighting for preservation of the traditions and values which founded and built and made Australia great. And I agree. If there are more and more Christians, there are absolutely, but there needs to be many times more.
Oh, definitely, yes. Yeah, and I mean, this is just going back one step, this is character. I mean, if you admit that you're wrong and you change and you develop and you grow and you obtain wisdom and you obtain some stature in yourself and you obtain greater abilities, that's what life's about. And actually, I think that this relativistic, postmodern, no-truth sort of thing is ultimately very anti-human. It's very anti-dignity. Because it says, I'll just wallow in who I am and the world will love me for it.
One perspective on the difference between this generation and previous, you've said we're now in this postmodernistic age where truth is relative. I think another observable migration we've had is from character development. We used to raise children to be good people. We used to teach them about how to be better people, how to be better citizens, how to be better neighbours, how to be better Christians. Now, we teach people what's wrong with society, and it's never our responsibility to change. It's always somebody else's fault, somebody else's responsibility, and we need to change them. And as such, nobody's changing.
That is absolutely true. This difference where, the truth is out there, it's good, and it's something I've got to aspire to, and I've got to be better, versus, the complete inversion of that, which is, the truth is in here, it's good, and you all better respect it. That's what's going on. And it's interesting, Dave, and we can probably talk about this in a minute, but this exact worldview has played out in the development of the law over the last few hundred years. Wow. There is so much of the fruits of that you're talking about in society that have actually determined how law is understood and how it's taught in law schools, and I believe that's responsible for a great many of the things that are going wrong in the legal world.
Well, when we come back, let's talk about the specific legal challenges that are facing us in Australia.
Sure.